many of us dream. What if we could just leave it all behind? Just walk away from the madness of the built environment. Just a little further away from the cities, the noise, the speed. What if we had just enough time to smell the morning breeze, to watch the sunrise, to test our skills and ingenuity? What if we just let those other people move on past? Let them go. Let them have their lifestyle. What if we just walked into the marsh, crossed the pond, and entered the forest? Join us for a conversation with Jay Kilgannon, a rap attack fire specialist, a captain with the Edmonton City Fire Department, a kite skiing instructor, and someone who chose to simply step outside and try something different.
All right, guys, so I'm Brian from Frostbite, and I am here in the Super Shelter with Jay, and we've got his story. Jay has been teaching outdoor living skills. He's been a student of Moore's since about 1999, and it's when he saw one of these, but I'm going to let Jay do the talking. So Jay, why don't you introduce yourself, talk a little bit about who you are, what you do.
Okay. I guess, to start with, I mean, I've had Moore's book since I was a kid, that's where it all probably started. I just read that thing, cover to cover numerous times and always wanted to learn more about what he was teaching in there. Taught survival a bit as Army, with the Army cadets and fighting forest fires with the Rap Attack program, which I was involved with for 10 years. And then finally met Moore's after, actually I started a course with Kelly when he was doing his Wildside wilderness tours up in Slave Lake. Took a course with him on sea kayak and wild edibles. He got me connected to Moore's. I'm like, always wanted to learn from that guy. He's like, oh, he's still around. He's awesome. You gotta go meet him. And so Kelly got me all fired up, and that's right when Karamat was just sort of starting out. And took their summer course in 1999, winter course that year, that following year, and then I think we went on and then I started as an apprentice instructor with them the following year, and then we did the walk together, 10-day walk. When was that? That was like 2001, and Tim Smith was on that walk. A lot of Moore's daughter Marissa was on it. A lot of really cool people.
Yeah, that was. How far did you guys go?
I mean, it wasn't. We weren't doing the walk to make distance. It was to encounter different micro ecosystems and finding what you could to live off the land in those systems. So we generally go between 5 to 10 miles a day. There were a couple areas where we settled down for a period of 2 nights just to allow the traps to get more game, and there seemed to be like water sources there that we could potentially catch fish. And one place we found a lot of shellfish as well, freshwater clams. So there just seemed to be abundance in those certain areas. So we spent a little extra time in those areas. And overall, I think we probably covered, close to, 80 miles, I'd say, something like that, 75, 80 miles.
And then what? Like you didn't bring a lot of kit.
No,
It was like bare minimum, like knife and a pot or something.
Yeah, most people, like, you were encouraged. You could bring whatever you wanted, but you were encouraged to sort of build a survival kit and utilize that and your clothing to sort of sustain yourself.
Yeah.
So I brought components for a small super shelter, and we did carry some group pots as well, and so it was a really cool experience for sure.
Yeah, we should do it again.
Yeah, I think it's time. The last time Caravan tried to organize one, they didn't seem to get many students for it, but it's a great experience. I highly recommend it for anybody who
for sure, right? I mean, that's the...
Yeah, and you'll lose a bunch of weight. Great weight loss program.
Man, why didn't you start with that?
10 days. Yeah, the weight loss infomercial.
Yeah, that's what I need.
10 days, I think I lost 16 or 18 pounds or something like that.
So you lost your winter weight.
Oh yeah, big time. I no longer had two chins.
All right, so speaking of super shelters, here we are. We're in your super shelter.
Yeah.
And this super shelter has been around for almost around 15 years?
16 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. 16 years now. I did the little checking of dates. 14 years then, I guess.
Yeah.
Doing the math. But, yeah.
So, you took a course with Moores in 99. Obviously, somewhere in there, we probably talked about the super shelter, maybe even taught you the super shelter.
Yeah.
Was that where you were like, cool, I got to build one?
Yeah, I think the aha moment for that was on one of the, I think it was the winter course that I took with him, he took us out to his camp, which is not far from his house there in Bear Lake, and he had one of this type of shelter set up with the wood stove in it, which to me is another evolution further of the super shelter. I've started calling it a super duper shelter. The addition of the wood stove, the head height that you can stand up in it, just really makes it so comfortable. The first words out of my mouth when I went into that, the wood stove going, is like, wow, you could live in one of these. And it was approximately 5 years later I was, so didn't see that coming like that, but it just they're a very comfortable way to live in the wilderness, and they're very quick to set up. The basics of this shelter it was a functional shelter within a day, of the day of building it. So
and this shelter is big enough, obviously, for more than just one. You have enough room for at least another bunk there.
Oh, easy, yeah.
And if we move stuff around, I'm sure we could fit another one in easily too. So, so a shelter for 4 people, it's a long, lasting shelter, not an overnighter. Could be if you wanted it to, but you can put it up that quick, and live in it for long term.
Yeah, sure.
I think that's one of the things that's such a cool thing about the super shelter is that there's not a lot of resources needed, and there's it does take a lot of time to build. So
exactly, that was the real amazing part about it, and it's just such an efficient design with a minimum amount of material. Like, I carried everything I needed in here on my back to build the thing, and and then utilizing the materials of the forest, and not a gross amount of materials. There's not a ton, some base, a few logs and a lot of saplings, really. So it's fairly minimal impact when you look at the big scheme of things, and just by carrying a few simple components, you've got a really livable shelter.
For sure. Yeah. The story I heard way back when was that Jay lived in this for a year. So winter, all 4 seasons, but lived in here the full time, which wasn't right. Because after I met him and realized that he was a firefighter, I couldn't understand why he would just live out here when he's a firefighter. Obviously, he's got shift work and things he has to do. Set the story straight. You came out here, you set up the shelter. What did you do with it?
Well, when I came up with the idea to live in the super shelter, the concept was I wanted to do it for a year. That was the goal. As it turned out, I was enjoying it so much that I ended up spending 2.5 years in the thing. It was 3 winters and 2 summers starting in from 2006 to the spring of 2009. So I enjoyed it so much, and there was just so many more things I wanted to do out here, but at the same time, like you were saying, I didn't live out here 365 days a year. At that time, I wanted to move out here. I wanted to practice my skills. I wanted to save a bunch of money to buy a place, to buy a new car, to travel more. I also, at the same time, moved kind of a rustic hunting trailer to Canmore, and wanted to ski more, wanted to spend more time in the mountains. So come 6 days off, I would bomb down to the mountains and based out of that trailer with a wood stove in it, and all the perks you have in the super shelter I had in that trailer with a few more. Actually, I had real walls and a propane stove as well. And then I was working shift work, so half my nights were at the fire hall. When I was in Edmonton, half were, I was coming from out here. I had a few stretches there where I house sat for people for a couple weeks while they're on vacation. Like I said, so I wasn't out here 365 days a year, but I was out here for 2.5 years. So a few inconsistencies in the story as it's sort of been passed around.
What's your main motivation for being here? Is it to get away from people? Some people would think that this is kind of a hermit life thing, or is it to deepen your connection with the forest, and then I think we talked about it earlier, where if you're going to be an outdoor instructor, it's important to actually learn by doing the skills.
It was the reasons why I did it were a real combination of a lot of things. I think the biggest one being when you're studying under Moores, he teaches survival, bushcraft, and wilderness living. To me, until you've spent some time living in the wilderness, well, how do you call yourself a wilderness living instructor if you've never actually done that? Mm-hmm. So to me, that added a lot of credibility to what I was trying to accomplish. Becoming a survival instructor under Moore's guidance. I remember going down to Rabbit Stick and speaking with Cody Lundeen about his experiences in living in, for prolonged periods of time in makeshift shelters and stuff like that. And to me, those are really key elements in becoming survival or wilderness living instructor. Is actually doing it, right? Gives you a lot more credibility, I think, as an instructor. So that was the number one reason, I guess. Number two was like I mentioned before, is I was just in a phase of my life where I wanted to do more with and save more money so that I could afford to do those things, to do the traveling, the living in the mountains and things like that, to have enough money to actually buy a place of my own. At the time, prices in Edmonton on real estate went from really affordable to like just about doubling their prices within about a 3 or 4 year time span there. So all of a sudden I was a little bit behind the 8 ball in the whole housing market. So
that was the boom, right?
Yeah. So I really wanted to kind of catch up on that and get something to call my own. And then there were some other reasons too. I was really wanting to kind of experience a more deeper connection with nature. I'd had a very busy sort of summer, doing a lot of firefighting competitions that year and a lot of fundraising for those competitions and charities and everything else. And I just was missing in my bush time and time in nature, and really wanted to reconnect with that. And for spiritual reasons as well. Like I've been a meditator for years and really wanted to kind of come spend time in the forest and be, have those opportunities to meditate more and get away from the busyness of city life. And my job can be very stressful at times too. So it seemed like a great way to decompress and find my balance point too. And it definitely accomplished all those things. Yeah.
So you've been out here for on and off for 15 years. Has the shelter pretty much been the same the whole time?
Yeah, it's kind of evolved that the more time I've spent out here, didn't have a floor like you see here in it when the first year or two that I was out here. I didn't have all the willow furniture, the birch chair you're sitting in, Brian.
Mm-hmm.
So eventually I built those things as projects. But the basic framework is pretty much stayed the same. I've had a few repairs to make with the saplings here and there, where I get a bit of a heavy snow load here and there, and it's kind of misshapen them or whatever, and I have to kind of repair them. I've added this spruce beam in to help handle those heavier snow loads. Sometimes if I'm not out here, especially since I sort of stopped living out here, and it just became my kind of escape from the city, or kind of get out here a lot in the hunting season and do some hunting out here. But that helped when I wasn't here for long periods of time. That enabled the shelter to weather those heavier snow loads. Other than that, a few, multiple rebowings of the bed, and some cleaning up of the place now and again. And
mm-hmm. And I think last time I was out, you said that you've changed the plastic 3 times. You've only had to do it about 3 or 4 times.
Yeah. When you're using this style of shelter, I use the heavy duty vapor barrier. It comes in the widths of it are 20 feet, so it enables it to wrap from ground to ground on both sides. But over the course of the years, sometimes I've had sticks fall through from above, poke a couple holes. I've had a bear actually came out and bit some chunks out of the shelter when I wasn't here one time. I've had people cut it open, just curious, didn't quite understand how the door worked. So I've had to replace the plastics on a couple occasions. But I find the longer you're out here, it's easier to just throw another layer of plastic over the old layer in general. It just gives it that much more resiliency to sticks from above and things like that. So
yeah, and you've got the parachute, which it's going to the floor, but you lucked out and got some panels, to give you more light.
Yeah.
Which it gives you that nice homey feeling in here,
yeah.
Right? It's not a dungeon,
yeah.
And that's kind of the beauty of this, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a concept that some people miss with the super shelter is when Moore's described it, it's like a greenhouse. So you do want the light to permeate the fabric, so that during the day and the heat of the day, you're going to get that greenhouse effect from the sun as well. So you don't have to be burning a ton of wood in your stove. It also gives you enough light to work with. I mean, I've spent time in log cabins that were so dark that you just about needed a light during the day to see in them.
So we talked about a bear coming in and chomping down on your shelter. What are the pros and cons of this? You've done it now for this long. What would you say? Good experiences and bad experiences of being out here, I guess, is a better way to put it.
Yeah. Okay. So like sort of highs and lows type sort of thing.
Yeah, like first of all, getting in here, it's a bit of a trek. It's at least 1,500 meters, maybe even farther. So it's to do that when you're on shift work.
Yeah.
You had to be getting up early, and coming back late.
Yeah, there were some long days, and in the winter time, I typically would cross country ski in here. Once there was enough snow to do that, so it'd be at least a 20-minute ski in and to get here, and in the winter your days are so short. You're mostly doing that in the dark. So so that gets a little dreary. And you know, get some cold mornings too, and cold evenings skiing back out here. You can get some pretty good winds as we experienced today coming out. So you factor that in with cold temps, and some of those days were, it was sporty at times. But if you got good gear, good clothing, it's pretty doable, and that was part of the adventure, right? The other, you know, inconvenient part would be in the summer. I would haul my own water out here. The lake out here is quite hypertrophic, got a lot of rotting vegetable matter in it, so you can filter it and make it drinkable, but it's not pleasant tasting water. So I mostly haul my water in the summers. In the winters it was actually far easier because I could just fill my pot with the snow right outside my door. And so those were probably the two toughest parts about living out here is the hauling the water in the summer, and then just the darkness in the winter, short days. But the pluses were just the real intimacy with nature you have in these. It's like staying in a tent more than a cabin, because when a bird lands on top of the roof, I can hear it, and I can usually identify what it is. You know, just because there's no sound barrier, right? There's not that thermal mass of the logs and there's, you know, you can actually see through the shelter in some places too. So you get a pretty intimate feel with the natural environment around you by being out here and living in one of these, and just, you know, when the wind's blowing, you hear it. You know, there's just, it's this real connected feeling out here to the land, and I really enjoyed that. And then, like I said, big plus was the amount of money I saved and the freedom that gave me to live life as I pleased without having to make sacrifices to save money for trips and things like that. You know, it was just it lent itself to a real sense of freedom.
Right.
That didn't have any bill payments. You know, my heat payments were just cutting more wood. You know,
which, I mean, it was surprising. We'll get to it later, but the amount of wood that it takes for a year to run this is substantially smaller than I thought it was.
Yeah.
I thought, you know, you'd have to have a couple cord of wood or something, and I think, you know, maybe you have a cord of wood out here, and that was, you know, a little bit from last year and some from this year, and the beauty of it is it's all, you know, mostly, you know, blowdowns from, you know, that you're able to harvest, and you don't have to worry about, you're actually living with the forest here, you know. You're not working against the forest. So, you know, the forest drops a tree, you're able to grab that, use that as firewood, as opposed to it's a hazard or it's in your way or whatever, right?
Yeah, like I was just out here a few days ago. There was a couple of standing dead trees that I was worried could, you know, in high winds come down on the shelter. So I'm always keeping an eye out for those, and those are the ones I dropped first and use for firewood. And like you say, there's tons that fall down on their own that are readily accessible as well. So the first year I spent out here, my goal was to just use a Swede saw and an axe for firewood procurement, and it was it's good exercise and that, and not too hard to accomplish, but you had to give it enough time to have that, you know, done with. But and then after the first year, I was like, I can probably cut enough wood for my needs in a year with, you know, an hour or two with the chainsaw. So I started doing that since then, and I was really surprised on the small amount of wood it takes. You know, because normally our winter temperatures right about now would be hovering in the, you know, minus 18, you know, minus 20-ish, you know, zone, which is not cool. Well, it's cold. For sure. I think if you were living in the shelter 24/7, you'd obviously go through a lot more wood. But I'm zooming off to work, you know, and zooming back, and then I'm, you know, so you don't burn near as much wood that way.
I mean, when we came in today and you opened up the shelter and got the wood stove going, you can tell it's something you've done a lot.
Yeah.
You know, like, because you had the fire going within minutes of being here and water on probably within 10 minutes.
Yeah.
You know, like fire going, water on, ready to go.
Yeah.
And that, to me, shows somebody who's done it enough times.
Oh, yeah.
It says, like, this has to happen now. And then I can worry about putting away, you know, my foodstuffs or whatever.
Yeah, it's all, you get a sort of just a routine set of priorities when you come out here, and that's always it. Start the fire, get the water going. You know, it takes a while to melt snow. But, you know, it just becomes second nature when you've done it lots, for sure. Yeah. One thing I can think of that has really made that, what you were just talking about, boiling water. Like, I'm using a more traditional wood stove, and it's not ideal to cook on, but by having a pot here that, I don't know if you can see this well enough, it nests right in the hole of the stove. So we can just plop it in there, and it boils a lot quicker than had we rested it on top of the stove. So that idea, you know, saved me a ton of time and for cooking and melting snow and such. So, yeah.
And your fire stick, that, you know, it doesn't look like anything when you hang it up with the other ones. But
Yeah, this guy, it's been with me since pretty much the start, surprisingly. It's just great for, you know, opening the stove, you know, if you got ashes in the bottom of your stove, to stir back into a fire, you know.
Yeah.
Accomplishes all those things, lifting, you know, pot lids and such too. So pot bail handles as well. So it's come in handy. It's just a simple stick, but anyway, what a baby.
My leg is on fire.
Oh wait.
So Jay, one of the things we wanted to talk about was the components of the super shelter, and maybe a little history, because you know what those, how they all came together.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, the origins, I guess, of a lot of this stuff. It all happened on actually one of Moore's courses that he was teaching to some, I think it was a younger scout group or something like that. And I remember the story quite clearly. And he talked about, he'd given them some plastic and showed them some lean-to concepts. And most of them built the plastic with the lean-to. But one group flapped the plastic over their front of their lean-to. And he was amazed at how much more comfortable they were than their other students who didn't do that. Being that the heat from their fires permeated the plastic on the front of the shelter, and it went inside and trapped that warm air inside that bubble. And it also kept the smoke out. So that's kind of where this concept was born with Moore's, and then he evolved it, taking into account the reflective qualities of an igloo, and combining them with mylar, we create the same effect with these branches in an arc shape. Now we have a similar shape to an igloo, which is a very efficient shape, and when you have a reflective surface like snow, or in this case mylar, reflecting that heat back down on you, it's a very efficient type of shelter. And then he took it a little bit further. So you've got the wands giving it a good structure, similar to the native sweat lodge or a wigwam type of shelter. So he took those components, it included the mylar and the plastic especially, to create that reflectiveness and then that trapping of heat inside. And then he added the parachute or some sort of nylon to sort of trap the condensation, because when you just have plastic and the mylar, you get a lot of condensation that ends up dripping down on you if you've spent a night in one of those. So this just helps trap the condensation and kind of bring it down so it's not dripping on you the whole time. Those are the three man-made components, are the mylar, the plastic, and then the parachute fabric. And then the rest of the components are sort of, we can take from nature, right? We've got the bendable wands. Birch is probably your best. Willow would be second. I found alder rot. It sort of dries out and falls apart relatively quickly after a year or two, but it'll definitely work in a short-term shelter. Anything that's bendable can work. You can also build these out of straight logs if you have no bendable wands as well. But definitely easier and stronger, I find, with the bendable wands.
Okay, so now we're outdoors, and Jay's gonna give us a tour of the Super Shelter. So, Jay, we're at your front door.
Yeah, I chose to put a big door on the one end with this variation, just because then I can lift up the parachute and kind of keep it up so if I wanted to cook on the wood stove, say on a rainy night in the summer when it's really warm out, I'm not like overheating myself in there. If you have a very small door, you can't dissipate that heat very well. So this enabled me to open it right up and create a different kind of living and cooking space, essentially. So that way I can, keep it open and still cook on my stove if it's raining out. I also chose some big overhead protection, a very large spruce tree, which had a bit of a close call once. If you look way up, it's a forked tree, and one of the forks broke off. Luckily, I wasn't here when that happened, and it didn't land on the shelter, but it did happen when the shelter was up. So I was fortunate with that. Didn't see that coming. Then I've built a bit of a platform here, as you can see. Having a sill log here keeps that cold air from draining out the bottom of your shelter, right? This is an important concept. I used to keep my tarp or my little canvas cape over here, and then I eventually just filled this all in with tule reeds that I was going to use to make a mat, and eventually it just became a super insulated sill and a nice bench to kick the snow off your boots, or even pleasantly sit out here even if we're raining, and just you can sort of see what's going on in the forest. And it's just a real nice addition to the shelter, I thought.
Yeah, so it's definitely gonna keep that draft from coming in once you drop that.
Yeah, once the parachute fabric's dropped, and the parachute is a key. Most days when I'm sleeping in here, when I drop that down, that is the sort of the vapor permeable membrane that allows me to get fresh air and oxygen into the shelter. If I were to bring the plastic all the way down, I'm starting to occlude any fresh air from getting in. So it's important to somewhere along the line have something where fresh air can be exchanged, right? And that's a big proponent that Moores had taught us about the Super Shelter, is having that layer there, right? So that you can get that fresh air, right? Because it is a bubble, and a heated bubble, but you want to be able to exchange the air inside that bubble.
Cool. So yours is a little bit different because you have a ridge pole, which isn't kind of standard, for super shelters. Not that it's bad. It's obviously, in this case, it's needed. So, it saved you a lot of work.
Yeah, it just helped dissipate those heavy snow loads when I wasn't here. So it was something I incorporated later on, 2 or 3 years, when I wasn't here near as much, So it's come in handy keeping the shelter. I have come out here. I learned that the hard way when I come out here, a big heavy snow load, and the area over my bed is pushed in about another 6 to 8 inches. So it's
Wow.
It's something I learned out of just being out here, and So now and it's something I've always been cognizant of. If we get a big snow load out here, this big stump of snow, I'm gonna want to come out here and sweep all that snow off to take the pressure off the roof, right?
Right.
So, yeah, something to, a little maintenance issue to keep on track of, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. And then so let's move in, and we'll talk about your wood stove and what makes the difference, as you call it, a super duper shelter versus a super shelter.
Yeah, I think the big difference with the in going from super shelter where you're sleeping beside a fire to a super duper shelter is the addition of the wood stove. Also, head height, right? By utilizing the 20-foot long vapor barrier plastic, gives you just enough length to fasten into the ground and still be able to stand up in, and then it gives you room to work around your wood stove and stuff like that.
If you could have time back, would you move your stove closer to you?
There are times on those minus 30 nights where I wish my stove was about here.
Right.
So yeah, there's definitely, I've considered my proximity to the bed to the stove, or I've also thought on those nights a bigger stove would have been helpful as well.
And was it for heat? Sorry, was it for heat, or was it for ease of feeding it in the middle of the night? So you wouldn't have to get out of bed.
Heat.
Yeah.
You in minus 30 or below, you start to feel a little more cold back there than you would, on a minus 10 night.
Right.
Obviously, but I'd say for the general amount of conditions, the location worked quite well. The other thing with this is the proximity of the sort of the natural hole in the parachute. So
Right.
that's kind of where I decided to put the stove based on where my parachute hung. So yeah, if I were to do it again, I might build a bed a little bit closer.
Right.
Yeah.
And then here's your homemade furniture, which is pretty swanky. Admittedly, I think this willow chair is pretty fantastic.
Yeah, it's all birch, and I picked up a twig furniture book, and it's been really helpful. And this willow love seat too has been a real mainstay out here. Just initially started with some cattail mats, and then upgraded to tule mats, which again could use some upgrading. They're getting a little worn these days, and my plan is to make some more mats. I originally had tule mats across the whole bed as well at one time when I was living out here, and that adds some comfort to the bed. And then the bed, we can talk a little bit about that. It's all spruce boughs, and as the needles fall off, you just add another layer of fresh spruce boughs, and those all become part of the box spring. Underneath here, I've probably got about 6 to 8 inches of spruce boughs, and below that, I have birch wands that have actually been here since I originally built the shelter. I'm amazed they've lasted that long.
Wow.
That's another thing with most of the wands in the ceiling are birch. It's a much more fibrous wood, so it tends to last a lot longer as long as it's kept dry. Once it gets wet, it rots pretty quickly, but I've found birch to be very long lasting for most of the things I've built out here, as long as it stays dry. So
nice. Your bush bed's a little bigger, a little wider than the average. I would consider that a 2-person bed.
Yeah, and I built it as a 2-person bed. I've had my the odd girlfriend out here who likes to camp out and stuff like that. So and it just gives me that ability to sleep 2 people comfortably on this bed. I did add I was gifted some R15 reflective bubble wrap that I put over the bed to kind of trap a little bit more heat over top the bed. It seems to have helped increase the warmth in my bed area, especially on those cold nights. But if you were to cover a whole shelter in it, you've lost the greenhouse effect. So you got the reflective capability, but you start losing the light penetration capability, which is important in a super shelter. You want to be able to have light in there to help heat it passively during the daytime.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, for storage, I initially had some metal boxes that I'd mounted here and here to keep my food in, thinking critters might be able to chew through or break into a plastic box. Eventually both those metal boxes were oxidized quite badly, so I took them out of here. It was a constant project of scraping the rust off and repainting them. And I've just gone with the plastic boxes now, and so far I've had food in this plastic box for over 10 years. Not once has a critter got into it. It's all dried food, mind you, and there's not a lot of bear activity in this area. We get the odd bear passing through, but very, very little bear activity. So that's how I think I've gotten away with that. If I were in an area where there were bears, I probably wouldn't do that. Yeah, and then I have another box here that stores my sleeping equipment or sleeping bag and a little bit of extra clothing, and that seems to get me by for when I come out here now.
Well, cool. Jay, I want to thank you for sharing your crib. We'll do the 90s MTV crib tour. And the super shelter story, because for me it was a big deal to hear about what motivated you to come out here, why you did it, how long you've been out here. I was really surprised at 15 years ish, because it's a long time for anybody. When I told that to my girls who are now 15, they said he's been doing it for a lifetime.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was more intensively for the 3 winters and 2 summers, but now it's become my just getaway spot, and my hunting camp. Basically, I do a lot of bow hunting out here in the fall, so yeah, it's a nice thing to have, and it doesn't cost me much to maintain. I replace the wood stove about every 3 or 4 years, and a little bit of plastic and mylar, and yeah, it's pretty cheap getaway place to maintain.
Cool. So thanks again, and I don't know, one last parting note. It's kind of neat that when we started talking about planning the video, we were doing it on December 5th, which was Moore's anniversary of I don't know if we want to call it an anniversary.
Yeah.
But it was neat to be able to sit in, Moore's invention. Is that a proper way of maybe putting it? But
yeah.
And that we can share this knowledge and skill and continue it on, and that still lives on, right? And the teaching of these things will stay,
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. Moore's left us an incredible legacy of knowledge, and my experiences out here, I'm happy to share that with people that are interested in this kind of stuff. It was a real proud achievement for me, and I'm very honored to have learned this stuff from Moore's. It's changed my life, honestly, mm-hmm. And I think it can change a lot of people's lives if they put what he taught us into practice,
Mm-hmm. Well, folks, that's a wrap. I'm on my way back to the car. Jay's gonna stay for a couple nights. Hope you enjoyed Jay's story as much as I did, and I hope you learned something. And if you did, don't be afraid to shout out and let us know what you thought. And if you want to learn how to do a super shelter like that, well, there's lots of lessons